What's up, Dan Cakes and Syrup?
Man, I'm just living, hobo.
Uh, this is my favorite part of the week is trying to come up with stupid names for you.
That's how it goes. That's what we do.
Yeah. How you been, man?
I've been all right. I've been doing pretty fair, pretty fair.
That's
Coming
good.
off of snow ice last week and night shift and all that bull crap, and switching back to days and back to nights and then back to days, and it's just it's a fun time.
Dude, I get it, man. Work's been kind of, I won't say it's been killing me because whatever, but like I was in Knoxville last 2 weeks ago or last week maybe. And so, yeah, last week. So now this week, when I'm in Knoxville, it's like I have to do twice the work when I come back because when I'm in Knoxville, I'm usually doing like events and stuff like that. So I come back and now I got 2 weeks worth of you know actual work to do. So, but it's fine. It's all good. So that's what I've been up to lately.
Well, good.
So
Those are
you
good.
ready to build a bar?
Let's build a bar. Let's do it.
So what are you sipping on tonight?
I'm sipping on Ancient Age tonight.
Mm. You know, I got in this argument or this online debate the other day because I posted online because Ancient Age is the same. Uh, it's the same mash bill as like Blanton's. It's a
Right.
different product, but it's the same. So I posted online the other day. I said Ancient Age is a better $10 bourbon than Blanton's is $100 bourbon. And of course, I had some people like, "Yeah, you're right," and then other people were, "I wouldn't go that far." So I started a little riff online the other day with that, but I love Ancient Age is one of my go tos. I always have one or two bottles on my bar, so
It's good
good.
stuff,
All
man.
right, so speaking of on my bar, this is normally when I would say, Dan, what are you bringing to the bar today? But then
And
we're
then
gonna do a little,
and then I would answer you.
and then you would answer me. But we're going to do something a little bit different tonight and next week because you and I have taken about 2 weeks off, and just you've had work and I've had stuff going on, so we haven't met for two or 3 weeks. And so, but in that process, in that time, you and I both have realized that you have friends, and so do I, that are kind of new to bourbon, new to whiskey, new to like their journey through this stuff. And I've had several of the same questions asked to me by my friends, and you've had some questions asked to you. So we kind of got together the other day and we thought instead of just jumping right back into more bottles and to our bar, let's address some of these questions, right? And so out of that, the two main categories I would say of questions that we've been asked about is basically it boils down to this: how to read a label. So I've had people ask me questions about things that are written on a label, and I have then I've also had people ask me questions about what makes up different kinds of whiskeys. And then I realized in saying all this, I forgot to tell you what I'm drinking tonight. So while I was in Knoxville last week, I had picked up this Ezra Brooks Cask Strength. I'm not a huge fan of Ezra Brooks, just the flagship product. But I am a fan of this Cask Strength. I've been wanting to pick up this bottle for a while, and so I did pick this up. So I did that. And before we get any further into our discussion tonight, why don't we cheers that?
I'll cheers that.
All right. Sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. I'm just excited about these topics that we have tonight. Um, and so, like I was saying earlier, we kind of broke these up into two categories. One is how to read a bottle or how to read a label, and the other one is how like what's kind of the differences in the whiskey. So tonight we're going to focus on how to read a bottle, and so I'm gonna let you kind of take it from here and tell me kind of what questions you've been asked and how you want to address this.
So I've been asking a number of questions. I'm going to take probably 4 or 5 of them tonight. We probably should have done this last, quote unquote season, but you know what? Better late
We
than
should have
never.
done this like the first and second episode, but we didn't.
Right. Well, these are kind of questions that, people, for you and I guess we've been doing this for a while. So I would never have thought to bring this up, but some newer folks that are just getting into this had these questions. I was like, crap, I never even thought about basic fundamentals. I got a guy that I work with that had asked me, said, Dan, got a question for you.
Said that.
Said that. And I looked at him in great mystery, as if to know what question he was about to ask me.
As
He
you
had
should.
asked me what the difference is of like proof and ABV, and maybe not what the difference is, but how do they relate to each other? And so I'm going to answer that first question. Proof and ABV relate to each other as this. If something is 90 proof, all right, so when you get your bottle and you look at the proof, you look and you'll see like that is, what does that say?
This says 120 proof.
Okay, that's 120 proof. So you
Because
subtract
it's
that in
cask
half.
strength.
It's cask strength. Cask.
Mm-hmm.
You cut that proof in half, and that's your ABV. So 120 proof divided in half would be 60% alcohol by volume. ABV stands for alcohol by volume. So 60% alcohol by volume, 120 proof. So when you go to the liquor store and you pick up a bottle, and like Bottle and Bond is always 100 proof, it's 50% alcohol. That's how you tell the similarities or the differences, or however you want to word it, in proof and ABV.
All right. Can I ask a question?
No. Number 2, just kidding.
So my question is, when I first got into bourbon and my journey first started, I called these people proof snobs because I ran into people. I joined these groups and people were like, "Oh, I don't drink anything less than 100 proof," or I like my stuff at 120 proof, and I like this and that." And I used to think like how dumb that really was because there's some really good 80 proof, there's some really good 90 proofs. But I want to ask this: is it true or false that the higher proof it is, does it strip away the flavor?
Okay. I'm going to say that potentially that's a loaded question because honestly, to me, and I don't know how this works, but the higher in alcohol something is, traditionally, yeah, it would strip away because at that point you're just getting the taste of alcohol, right? A lot of your flavor comes in, like in the moonshine world, a lot of your flavor comes in your tails. And I know that I'll have a lot of people disagree with me on that. That's okay. But I find that a lot of your flavor comes in on your tails. However, when you do cask strength, things
Mhm.
like that, and it's in a barrel, what it's important to memorize, or to not to memorize, what it's important to understand is that your alcohol imparts, like, okay, as an example, have you ever steeped vanilla beans before?
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, we make our own vanilla here. So when we steep vanilla beans, we don't steep it in water. We steep it in alcohol, and they're
Okay.
quick. And the reason we do that is because stupid cat's tearing my chair up.
That's 100% staying in here.
She's not. The reason we steep vanilla beans in alcohol is because that alcohol draws out flavor of the beans. It's an infusion. That's basically what it's doing in the barrel. It's infusing it. So the higher that alcohol content, it's pulling out more complex flavors in the wood. Does that make
Right.
sense? So essentially, when you're taking 120 proof, whiskey, you're tasting cherries, vanillas, almonds, toffees, all these different characteristics in a barrel.
100%. So I was not a believer. like I used to think 100% you're just a proof snob. You're just saying that to. It's like those people that buy like a bottle of Pappy and then they take pictures of it on their shelf because they're never going to open it. Like it's just a braggadocious kind of thing to say. But I've always thought like, there's people that are like, only drink 125 proof. That's like, whatever. But I will say this, man. Me and Heather were at a restaurant, a bar in Bardstown a couple months ago. And asked to have a pour of a specific bourbon and they were out of it. And so I started scanning the bar and another product, this is Ezra Brooks Cask Strength, another product that I'm not like either way I could care less about is Benchmark. It's a bottom shelf bourbon that's made by um uh my mind just went blank.
Evan Hill.
No, it's made by Buffalo Trace. And it's just a bottom shelf bourbon. So it's not that I dislike it, but it's like, yeah, it's like any other bourbon. But they had Benchmark full proof. So it's 125 proof. So I asked for a pour of that. And so they gave me a pour of that. And man, I'm going to tell you what, when I tasted that, it instantly became my favorite. I know this is this is whatever. It's 125 proof, everyday drinker. It became instantly my favorite because I tasted immediately the most dark, burnt brown sugars and those dark baking spices. They were so pronounced in that. And it's night and day difference than any. I mean, when you drink Benchmark, it's like drinking any other flagship 80 proof product. I mean, nothing special about it, nothing super special about it, but it's not bad. I mean, it's not terrible whiskey. But dude, that Benchmark foolproof, I will always have a bottle of that on hand because it is that delicious. And I took that to a buddy's house last week when I was in Knoxville, and he's very particular about his whiskey. And I poured him a pour of that, and he kept the bottle. That's how much he liked it. He kept the bottle, and so yeah. So I do think ABV, the proof of it, the higher proof. I used to think people are proof snobs, but I do think like I'm sitting here sipping on this Ezra Brooks Cask Strength right now, and it's a phenomenal bourbon. And like I said, the regular Ezra Brooks is just like to me, it's like a normal flagship 80 proof product. It's not terrible, but it's not anything special about it. But this is some really good stuff. So I didn't want to hijack your episode, but yeah,
Well, you actually added a very good point because always remember that by ABV, I have a little saying, and it's like ABV is always always be voicing. So like you have to always be voicing like I want that 125 proof. You know what I mean?
that's exactly how I remember it, you idiot.
You just
All right, next
a
question.
nugget. All right, next question. Why are some bottles distilled or aged in different locations? Well, that's easy. It's because they're not in the same location. Next question. No,
True.
you have a lot of like one of the ones that I'll give a specific example of is George Dickel. It's one of my favorite bourbons. I don't know how true this is, so I'm going to fact check this, but I was told that they only distill 6 months out of the year. Now, I don't know if that's a season. I don't know if they were talking about seasons or if they legitimately only distill in the fall and the winter months. However, I know that at certain times, I can go to the store. Like on base, we have the Class 6. I go to the Class 6 and I can get a bottle that says distilled and bottled in Tennessee, Cascade Hollow, Tennessee. Other times I go and get the same bottle and it says distilled in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. So what happens is, and I don't know if that's an older one, but like for instance, a second one is Bullet Bourbon. Theirs is distilled before they became an up and coming distillery. They source their stuff out of MPG, which is in Lawrenceburg, Indiana.
MGP.
What MGP?
Yeah. It's
Um,
fine. You're
it's
drunk. I get it.
and one of the ways that I remember that acronym is many gate parties. So
There you go.
that's kind of how I've always remembered that.
Yeah.
So what they
And then
do
you
is,
never get it wrong.
yeah, I've never gotten that wrong a day in my life, and so they send out like whatever mash bill Bullet wants, and they pay for it. They age it, and so they ship it out. So until their product is ready, so Bullet has like a barrel house, right? It's just their product isn't ready yet. We've got another friend that has kind of the same thing, right? He's like, he'll do stuff in small quantities, like 2 years, and
Yeah.
he'll be like, all right, this is a taste of what's to come.
Right.
And so that's kind of why they're distilled and aged in different, so like you may look on there and it'll say distilled in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, or distilled in wherever, like Scotch, for instance. Scotch is big into blending rather than distilling. So you may have one that's distilled in Glasgow, but it's actually part of Isla or Islands of Isla. So anyway,
Hmm.
I hope that maybe answers some questions.
Yeah, and I think though, when I first got into bourbon, I just like, and I still do this sometimes today. I'll get wrapped up in the story, or I get wrapped up in the marketing side of a bourbon. It's like, for instance, I'm a huge George Remus fan. I love the historical account of George Remus. I love the story. He's a thug, and he was a, but I love his story. And a couple years ago, George Remus bourbon came out, and I mean, I bought it just because it was a Remus bourbon, but it is an MGP product. They literally there's no George Remus distillery. It's literally distilled and owned. The brand is owned by MGP. But I think a lot of times what gets people in trouble is, like you said, these distilleries will start out and say, okay, I don't have, like, if I'm just starting out a distillery, I don't automatically have 2 year old or 4 year old or 10 year old bourbon. So I either have to depend on selling like, gin or something like that until my stuff ages, or I can buy it, source it, and then I have two choices from there, or three choices really. I can claim it's mine, which people will find out real quick you're lying, and then you get in trouble. You can just bottle it as your own and tell people like, this isn't our stuff, but it's the same recipe that's gonna be our stuff, and just trust that it's gonna taste kind of the same. Or what a lot of people do is they'll take some stuff from MGP, which MGP is a company, and they make whiskey, and they subcontract, subdistill, contract distill for people, and they're good at what they do. They are good at what they do. Therefore, people all over the United States use them. And so I don't ever have a problem when a product of mine says, distilled by MGP or whatever, because I know it's going to be a good product. But what gets people in trouble is if they claim that this is their own stuff, or they're not transparent about what here's the future. This isn't the future. This is just to subside. But a lot of times what people will do is take MGP products and finish it in another barrel, or do something to it to make it their own. So this started out as an MGP product, but I finished it in a rum cask, or I finished it in, whatever. So it's my product now. And so I don't think people are as unforgiving of that. They are unforgiving whenever you say, this is my product, it was distilled at my distillery, and it was bottled and aged by me, and it was whatever, and people can clearly look on the back and say, this doesn't say it was distilled by you, this says distilled in Lawrenceburg, Indiana,
Well,
or
yep.
this says distilled by MGP. So it's that kind of stuff that gets people in trouble. And I think people are becoming more transparent. If you think about 20 years ago, nobody in the bourbon industry really cared where their bourbon came from. Now that there's, bourbon groups and bourbon influencers and podcasts and all this stuff, people want to know, where did this come from? What's special about this? So if you're lying about it, you're going to get caught lying about it. And that's what puts people in a bad category. And there's been one or two that have been caught doing that, but most of them are pretty honest about it. So
And
yeah.
I think that goes back to honesty is the best policy.
Mm-hmm. Dude, I'm just gonna be honest with you. This is our third podcast tonight, and this 120 is catching up with me. But you're funny.
You're making me blush. I
Continue.
Well, okay, so on that aspect, like the finishing off in like the rum or the sherry cask or whatever. Another question I got was why why does the age differ on some bottles? Okay.
Okay.
So as an example, and I just want to touch on this. I won't say too much about it, but like as a like a straight whiskey, if it's 4 years or younger, that's if it's aged 4 years or younger, it's got to be that's where that straight whiskey comes in. Now there are
Well,
whiskeys
straight means 2 years, or it has to be 2 years to be a straight.
two. Is it two or older?
Yeah, 2 or older has to be straight.
Okay,
And
two or older has to be straight.
yeah, and
Okay,
4 years old, 4 years and older, it doesn't have to have
it
an
doesn't
age
have to
statement
be
on
like okay,
it. Mm-hmm.
but if it's a three, like if you look on there and it says 3 year, like aged 3 years, they may have pulled from 1,000 different barrels aging from 3 to 20 years, but they
Right.
have to put the youngest
Right.
barrel on there. So the youngest being 3 years old, that's where they get that 3 years. So that's why the ages differ. Now, bottled and bond has to be 4 years. So this is why you have like some that are 3 years, some that are 4 years. Now, I will say this for the Scotch folk, these 12 and 16 years, the reason it's 12 and 16 years and so on and so forth is because their seasons are so vastly different from ours. If it's 3 years in Kentucky, we have 4 seasons: spring, winter, fall, summer. Overseas in Scotland, it's cold and gloomy all the time. So, where we can get our age taste in 3 to 4 years, it takes them 12 years to get to that age.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was reading something the other day, kind of off topic here, on Snow Shift. One of my friends I was with was talking about brandies that he likes. And I've never heard this, so we looked it up, but there's an XXO. Or it's like extra, extra, or it's extra, extra P, like extra old pale, XOP, XXOV, or whatever. I can't remember. So, anyway, dude, some of these brandies are aged for 60 years.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And he's like, "Do you think they taste good?" I was like, "Probably not." So I don't know. VOP, very old pale. That's what it was. And so anyway, I don't know if it's going to be any good or not, but I don't have the $2,000 to pay for it either.
Hey, I do want to point out. I want to go back to you said bottled and bond has to be 4 years. It has to be 4 years or older, but most of it is 4 years because it has to be in the same distilling season. So you can't mix a 4-year-old with a 10-year-old or a 4-year-old with a 20-year-old. If you're going to have all 20-year-old bottled and bond bourbon, it all has to be 20-year-old, but it can't be less than 4 years old. So you were talking about earlier that like if you mix a 20-year-old barrel with a 1-year-old barrel, it has to be 1-year-old bourbon. And I think that's interesting because I was listening to some guys do there was a bottle I was wanting to buy a couple weeks ago, and so I went to this podcast that I normally watch, and they were reviewing this barrel, and it's a 2-year-old bourbon. So I was kind of I don't usually buy 2-year-old, like 2-year-old's a little young for me, but I also don't like anything really much over 12-year-old. But a 2-year-old is sometimes I don't really like it, and so but it's a 2-year-old bourbon. But I really kind of wanted it because it was aged and it was finished, I think the whole thing was aged in toasted oak. So that's a different process. It's than charred. Toasted kind of brings out more flavors. But anyway, I was listening to their comments, and they were saying that this does not taste at all like a 2-year-old bourbon. And I bet they have different age statements, different age barrels mixed in, but it has to be called a 2-year-old because that's probably the
The
youngest
youngest
barrel that
one.
they have in there. But they could have 4-year-old or 6-year-old barrels mixed in there, but they have to call it two. But also, I did a film a couple years ago with my buddy Steve, and we talked about blending. And one of the processes that got Four Roses in trouble was they were mixing new make whiskey with their blends to stretch out the product and not have to worry about aging so much. And so if you mix a new make with it, you don't have, I mean, you still add the youngest barrel, but you could add up to, I mean, maybe 20, 60 or 80% new make. It would be a terrible product, but a lot of companies were doing that. And that's why blending in America became such a taboo thing, because they were blending new make in with it. And, like say it was 80% new make, and then the remaining 20 of it was, a 2-year-old barrel and a couple of 8-year-old barrels. It was still a 2-year-old whiskey, but the majority of it was new make. So you can get in trouble doing that. So that's why, I've heard people say a lot that, the label, I've heard people say in the bourbon industry, the label is the biggest liar in the industry, because, people find ways to tell you what they want to tell you and make it to where you think it's one thing, but it's another thing. Does that make
Well, that's
sense?
like this, man. Like if it's over 4 years, you don't have to put an age on there, right?
Correct.
So I
Correct.
mean, you could be drinking 5 years or 12 years. I don't know, man. I think that I would like to get to a point, because I do like 2-year-old whiskey. I do like that fresh wood taste.
I like some of it, but some of it's not. Like I bought a bottle a couple weeks ago that's a couple more years would have made it a really good whiskey, but it's just kind of average at this point, And I'm not saying all 2-year-old whiskey, because my buddy Royce Neely, when he first started, he came out with 2-year-old whiskey, and dude, that stuff drank like a 4 or 6-year-old. It was super good, but some of it's just not as defined and
But I
refined
will
as it
say
should
this though
be.
too, and this is kind of has nothing to do with the questions, and I'll be done after this. But I do want to say it. I'm not knocking any particular distiller or whatever, but the product that you put into it
Oh yeah, for sure,
completely ages it. And I
one
know
hundred percent, 100%.
specifically with Royce, like his clear product is freaking awesome. So
Yeah,
he
for
can
sure.
put it in there for 12 days, and it's going to be like, man, this is freaking awesome. So, not knocking anybody else, but
Right, right.
but anyway, those are the questions that I had, and that I answered, and I think that I answered them okay.
Yeah,
And,
I think you
and
covered them. I just, one of the things that puzzles me is, and I don't know if there's an answer. If there is an answer, I don't have it. But why, if you were going to go through the trouble of putting out an 8-year-old product, why you wouldn't want that 8-year-old statement on there? Or and some do. I mean, there are certainly, some there are some products that have age statements, like, you might have like a Heaven Hill 12-year-old, or you might, they have age statements on them. Some of them do, but it just doesn't make sense to me why you would not want to put an age statement on a
I've never seen
product
one
that,
that doesn't. Like George
I
Dickel,
mean,
they have 12.
like, there's a lot of them that don't have it on there. I mean, some of them, but here's the thing though, like you look at a product like Old Charter. Old Charter is a Buffalo Trace product, and it used to be Old Charter 8-year-old, and now if you buy it, it just says Old Charter number 8. It doesn't mean it's an 8-year-old product anymore, but they kept the 8 on there, so it's Old Charter number 8. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's 8 years old. Or you look at, even like, let's go out of bourbon for a second. Jack Daniel's Old Number 7. Who knows what that means? Does that mean it was traditionally a 7-year-old whiskey, or what does that mean? Was it?
Well, have you ever been to the distillery?
Yeah, no.
So in their thing, it says that the number seven was like the seventh. They said it's either the old like the seventh recipe that he had, or it was a
Could be.
grain or something like that. But I'm with you. I guess maybe there
Well,
are bourbons out there that don't put the age on there. Maybe I don't pay
there are a
attention.
lot that don't, and the point is, I think, I have a buddy in the industry, and I'm not going to say his name, but he's always like, because I'm just a fanboy of whiskey. I'm a fanboy of bourbon, and I mean, if a distillery tells me this is their pappy's recipe, then I believe it wholeheartedly because I want it to be true, and I want them to succeed. But my buddy told me one time, he was like, dude, the biggest liars in the world are people that write these labels, and they know the loopholes of how to. And so, and I'm not calling out any specific person, but if you have a brand that's, Dan Cumberland's 12-year-old whiskey, and then you decide to start putting out 2-year-old whiskey, but you call it Old Dan's number 12, people are going to assume that it's still 12-year-old whiskey because that's what it used to be, and it's not anymore. And I went to a guy's house several years ago, or not several years ago, about a year ago, and we were drinking bourbon and stuff, and he put out this rum, and the name of the rum, I'm not going to say it, but it has a number. It's like the rum, and then it's a 23. And he was like, man, try this. This is the best stuff you'll ever taste. It's a 23-year-old age rum and whatever. And it was super good. He gave it to me and said, taste and tell me what it is, what kind of whiskey it is. And I thought it was a brandy because it was so like fruity. It was so good. And he was like, yeah, it's a 23-year-old aged rum. And I was like, are you serious? So I went to buy some. And when I went to buy it, it's not 23 years. It's not 23 years old. It's got 23 ingredients in it. And so, but they do it to make you think it's 23 years old.
That's
It's
like
been aged for 23 years.
I used to think that Baskin Robbins aged their ice cream for 31 years, and
They do. They do.
I was like, "What?"
So yeah, so I just think it's important for people, my friends and your friends, and I wish I had known all this when I was first getting into bourbon. Because, like I said, I know how to read labels now, but I still sometimes fall into the trap where I'll buy something. I'm like, man, this is so cool, and then I get home and I'm like, what the heck? Like, I wish I had. So, but I just, I want to trust and believe that the stories are what they say they are and the labels are what they say they are. But my buddy is like, dude, those are the biggest liars on the planet, the ones that write these labels, because they know the loopholes and they know what they can and can't put, and they know how to word it to where it seems like it's something. So that's just something to watch out for, and not watch out for in a bad way, but just know that sometimes like what you're drinking, you think you're drinking, may be actually distilled by another distillery, or it may be produced by somebody else, or it may not be what you think it is. And that doesn't mean it's bad whiskey. That just means like that just gives you something else. Like you said, you've had buddies, and I've had people. I have a one particular friend who's just getting into bourbon, and he texts me probably 4 or 5 times a week with questions. And it's like, man, I love it. I love to be able to. I love it when I can answer his questions, and I love it when I have to respond and say, dude, I don't really know the answer to that, but let's figure it out. Let's do it. And so, I love that stuff, and just people that are new to this, just to know that it's not always what it seems on the label. That's I just think it's kind of cool. So it's something we probably should have covered a long time ago, but we didn't, and we
Marketing.
should have.
Yep, I agree.
That's on us. That's on us,
That's
man.
on us. That's our fault.
That's on us.
That's our fault.
All right, man. Well, next week we are going to actually talk about the different types of whiskey, differences in whiskeys. So it's just kind of same format. It's based on certain questions and stuff that we've been asked. So until next week, man, I'm out completely. You can see, but I love you. And
Love
here's
you.
cheers to that little bit right there.
Cheers a little bit.
Love you, homie.
Love you, Bubba.
Bye.
If you like what you heard tonight, check us out on these social media platforms. Just search for My Journey Through the American Spirits. Also, check us out on our new website,